Today I'm here to talk to you about fencing for small ruminants. My name's Paulette Tomlinson. I am the extension agent here in Columbia County. I work with livestock, forages, and natural resources primarily. Uh-oh. Hang on. I don't know what happened. Here we go. So this is not a how to build a fence presentation. If you're interested in learning how to actually build a fence, we do have a link that Alicia is going to share with you. We had another group of agents that did that for our livestock and forage field day back in July. And so we'll have that link available for you. But if you need some more information on actually building a fence, the how to construct it rather, just let us know. This rather is a things to consider when you're building a fence presentation. So first of all, things that you want to consider are good fences make good neighbors. I had never heard that before until I moved up here, and we got a little bit of land, and we had a neighbor that our fences really weren't very good. There was, I used to call fixing those fences kind of a degree in vinology. Most of the fence was barbed wire and vines had crawled all over it. So we were moving and twisting vines in amongst the barbed wire. So needless to say, we had some cattle that were moving into our place. And most of the time when I would get home in the afternoon from work, I would find somebody else's cows in amongst ours, and trying to put them back all the time was not necessarily the most fun for the afternoon. So good fences do make good neighbors from that regard. But we have a human aspect to that, and we have a wildlife aspect to that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. And then location. Location is critical. So we'll discuss a little bit more with that. Who's going to construct the fence? You are a contractor. And then we're going to go through needed building materials and also the necessary equipment that you'll need to construct the fence. So good fences make good neighbors. Loose animals in the neighborhood is really not a good thing. I've had calls over the years where people were worried about their animals actually sticking their head through the fence, and worried about dogs, neighbor dogs, or a pack of dogs in the neighborhood that would, they were afraid that they were going to get killed. And in some cases that did happen. But loose animals can cause damage to others' property. Just imagine if your goats or your sheep got loose in your neighbor's garden. That might not turn out so good. They might be a little bit unhappy. They may make a mess. They may go up on the porch and leave some droppings. Stepping out in your slippers might not be so good in the morning if that was to occur. I know when sometimes dogs and maybe even cats go next door, people get a little upset about that. So hopefully you don't have some bad neighbors, but certainly good fences are going to help out with that. The other thing about a good fence is that it's going to keep your animals from eating some bad plants. And when I say bad plants, azaleas are a killer for goats, and I believe sheep as well. And a lot of folks up here have azaleas in their yard. There's a lot of other plants that are out there that are nice ornamentals, and they're great and pretty to look at, but when an animal eats it, they can be very toxic and they could die. And by dying, I don't mean by just eating the bad plants. Your animals get out, they get on a road, somebody comes along with a car, truck or whatever, there could be a serious accident. And the worst thing is that perhaps somebody else gets very hurt in the process. And then wildlife. This is typically the thing that we worry probably more about when talking about sheep and goats, because there's so many predators out there. And the one thing that can happen is if you've got poor fencing, you can have wild animals into your property and attack those animals. I've had that happen before. And then they found the one hole in the fence that was big enough for them to crawl through. And they attacked and killed the goat and terrorized everybody else. So those kinds of things happening, you've really got to check your fence. And we're going to talk about different types of fence that will help keep predators out. Also, I mentioned it a little bit about your neighbors, but goats are pretty bad about sticking their heads through a fence and getting stuck. And if you're, even if your fence is in an area where you can see it every day and you check them every day, if you're gone at some point in time and their head is stuck through, say you live in one of those neighborhoods and there's, perhaps a large dog, or maybe there's just neighborhood dogs. I've heard of little poodles and other dogs that you would not, other dog breeds that you would not think of as being attack oriented, but they pack up and they can cause problems. And obviously, if a goat is stuck in a fence, they could definitely be killed. Location. When we think about location of our fence, we typically are probably thinking, okay, well, we're just going to put out a perimeter fence. And if that's the case, that's fine. That's your property line. But something that you may be thinking of, or that you could consider, is if you're going to put it on your property line, maybe you want to talk to your neighbor if they've got animals too, or maybe they've got a large area that they just want to fence. They may be willing to go in half on the fencing material, or supply a little labor. I know up here that may not be as common as from where I originally am from, down south, where we had miles of fence, and typically cattlemen would work together, and somebody would either provide all the labor to put the fence line in, and the other property owner would purchase the materials. Now that doesn't always happen. Some people, don't have the finances to be able to do that. The other consideration about putting your fence on the property line is that technically that fence belongs to basically you and your neighbor at that point. Now I do know someone who wanted to make sure that that was never in question, that the fence was his. So he always made sure that his fences were at least 6 inches inside the property line, and that fence belonged to him. So anything that was done to it was him. And there's fencing laws that you can look at. There's a website through UF that they go through the fence law. The other thing is about fencing, you might be looking at just putting in some interior fencing. So that's going to make a decision, or you can make a decision about using something, maybe some, I don't want to say cheaper material, but lesser cost type material. We can kind of, if you're fencing on your property line, it definitely needs to be a very stable structure, and one that your animals can't get out of. Speaking of that, when you build a fence, the fence is to keep your animals in. It is not to keep other people out. It is not to keep other animals out. The fence is to keep your animals in. So that's kind of if you think about it, that's kind of critical. There's some other things to think about. Some of this is short term, some of it is more long term. And that is, if you're in the process of just putting in a place, where's your house located? Is there some way that you can build around your house? Maybe you don't want the goats and sheep or your other animals right next to the house. Maybe you want a little further away, because sometimes those animals can bring smells that aren't so pleasant. So, and sometimes you can't build fence far enough away from your house to do that, to keep the smells down. But you want to think about your neighbors, again, for the same reasons that we were talking about before. Where are their structures? Where are your working pens? And if you don't have any working pens for your animals, then think about where do you want those to be. I only have a cattle example of this, but I know that I've had some cowboys in the past tell me that they've gone to help people load cattle out of their field, and they've built their pen dead center of the field. Animals tend to go to corners, and so if you don't have a funnel of some type that allows those animals to kind of be guided in somewhere, that could be pretty hard to work those animals if you need to gather them up. Now with goats and sheep, I know I just shake a bucket and here they come. So that may not necessarily be an issue for small animals, but if you decide to go with anything larger, definitely keep that into consideration, or take that into consideration. And there's plenty of other things to think about. Structures, your well, where's your water sources located, especially for interior fencing. You're going to want to know where you're going to locate your water. Maybe you're going to share water troughs. That can determine. I think I have a picture that I can show you later that shows a water trough that's split between two fields. It's always nice to do that. It cuts down on cost, and especially if you're doing some rotational grazing. Next thing is on location is some help to help you out. In something that I have used quite a bit has been a GPS. Helps you draw straight lines, that's for sure. Google Earth or another satellite type mapping program where you can actually use the picture of your property and kind of draw out your fields, your pastures, create a book. A lot of what Alicia was talking about was pasture management and reducing parasite loads. If you create a book that has soil samples in it, which pastures that you sampled, and you can do that very easily by having one of these satellite photos of your property, and then outlining where your structures are at. Where's your perimeter fence? Where are your interior fences? And it can help start building a picture for you for a long-term management of your entire system. One other resource that I did want to mention about location is that if you do decide to if you're putting in a perimeter fence, or if you are trying to fence out, say, a wetland, you can actually get some financial help from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And that's a government agency. If you're not familiar with them, I think you can just type in nrcs.gov, and that should get you to their website. The next thing is, who's going to construct the fence, you or a contractor? Having built some fence over the years, I can tell you that it's a lot easier when a contractor does it, but it's more expensive because obviously you're going to pay them to do it. There's some areas that I didn't want to go into that it was a whole lot easier to pay somebody to go into it, and so that was nice. But if you can't, if you're going to do it yourself, there's definitely some steps and things that you want to do to make sure that you're building it correctly, and it's going to stand for a long time. I've seen fence that's stood up for the last 30 years. So if you build it correctly and you build it strong, you'll be in good shape. Contractors typically charge by the foot, and then they also one consideration that they have is the type of fence that you're putting in. Stringing barbed wire is probably the least cost versus one of the field fence or actually a no-climb fence. The harder the fence is to put up, the more it will cost you. But either way, whether you're going with a contractor or you're going with a yourself doing it, you're going to need some building material. And one of the things that I would definitely tell you is to shop around for the best prices and the right material. Not everybody carries the same material. Some people carry fence posts that are only 2 inches, and then there's others that will carry them from 2.5 to 3 to 4 inch, which is typically what you'd want to use for a line post if you're using wooden posts. And then for brace posts, which is the foundation of a good fence, your corner post, you want a big post. Kind of depends on what size gate you're going to hang off of it, but a 7 to 8 inch post is probably a minimum of what you would want to use. And so you might have to shop around and find that. And I know years ago people have used, they've cut power poles up that were no longer being used, and put those in. Those don't typically move once you get them set correctly. And or even rail ties have been used. For building material though, what you're really going to want to do is you're going to need to make a list, and that list is going to grow or it could shrink based on decisions that you're going to make. And you're going to need to be making some of those decisions pretty early on. You're probably going to decide pretty quickly at the, what kind of wire are you going to use? What kind of posts do you think you want to use? What about gates? Where are you going to put your gates? Do you want small walk-through gates, or do you want larger gates? You need a gate to bring equipment in. You're going to need some staples. You might need some nails. And then with electric fence, I thought I'd throw this in there because if somebody's doing some interior fence, there's definitely a list of things that you're going to need with that. Electric fence has got quite a bit of, you're going to need an energizer for the fence. They have netting now that actually can be used for sheep and goats and poultry. And I did find that Gallagher actually has these fence kits that are available for up to 10 acres. They're pretty pricey, but if that was something that you were interested in doing, and I don't believe that they have the netting, they were wire, but you can actually put 6 or 9 strands of electric fence around and use it as a perimeter if that was necessary. But anyway, that's something else to check out. And then there was a good fence article that I found from the University of Maine. And again, all this will be available to you after this program today. To get into some of the specifics about the wire, field fence, the old field fence that you see most they're not squares, or slightly rectangular, typically a 6x7 or 6x8 inch, and then they gradiate down smaller as you get to the bottom. Typically that's used for cattle fencing, and it kind of is expensive. And it says right on the label, I've never read a label, but I was researching this, I did look, and it says it's not recommended for sheep or goats. So, and the reason for that is that goats will stick their heads through it. Barbed wire, probably not a good idea for goats or sheep, because goats and sheep, typically the rams, the others will do it too. They like to rub on the side of the fence. I know that people have probably seen their fences go from a perpendicular standpoint to almost laying over on the ground. I know I've seen wire bulging out from where billies have rubbed and rubbed, or other goats have rubbed and rubbed. Panels. Panels can be used. Welded wire is typically what those are made out of. We typically talk about cattle panels or hog panels, but they do make a 2x4 inch welded panel, but those panels are very expensive. They range in size, I think, from 16 to 20 foot, but those could be used obviously within, if you were making pens or making that area, that dry lot that Alicia discussed about keeping animals in before you turn them out to the rest of the field. And then there's small ruminant fencing. So they actually have this now. This wasn't available years ago, but preferably most of the small ruminant fencing is the 4x4 inch square wire, but you can also get a no climb wire that is again the 2x4 wire, but it is not a welded wire. For posts, you want to make sure that you're using wooden posts that are treated. I have been to places where people actually were using landscape timbers that they had purchased from Lowe's or Walmart. I think they were less expensive, and so they were utilizing those. They don't make good fence posts. They rot out pretty quickly. Florida is known for all of our wetness, dampness, and termites. So you want a treated post. And most of those posts, like I said, I've seen posts last for 20 to 30 years. Your line post, if you decide to use wooden posts, you probably want to use a 3 to 4 inch post. And those I have found recently, building prices, in case you've not priced any lumber at all, has almost doubled in cost over the summer and this year. Call it the pandemic or whatever, but building materials have definitely increased. So I have found where at a local farm store, line posts were nearly $7 up to $14, depending on where it's at. That's the reason why I said shop around for sure. Your brace post, which again is the foundation of your fence, of any fence, the brace post or your corner post, you're going to want something that's a 6 to 7 inch or larger, and those will range anywhere from what I found anyway, $17 to $20, but they could be even more expensive than that. Your metal T-post, they typically sell those in bundles of 5 or 10, and you're only going to use a metal T-post as line posts. And then you have plastic posts or stakes, for electric fence, and I would not necessarily recommend either one of those types of posts for the perimeter fencing if you decided to go with electric on the perimeter. Gates. Gates are very important and a very important consideration. You might want a little walk-through gate that goes from your house or your barn right into the pasture or paddock. That's a fantastic thing to do. But then you're going to need a gate that you might use pretty regular to drive your truck into the pasture, or a gator or some other UTV. But then you might decide that you want the farmer neighbor down the road that's got a batwing mower to come and mow your field because either your lawnmower's too small, and the weeds are too big, or you don't have a tractor, your mower's broke, something's happened, whatever it is, and you need a piece of equipment to come in there. You're going to need a bigger gate. A 12-foot would be a minimum. A 14 might be something you want to consider, and a 16 is definitely something big enough to let anything through. But again, the larger the gate, the more expensive it's going to get, the bigger the post you're going to need. And then there's other gates that you might decide where you want, but you're going to need to know how, determine how many gates you're going to want. Staples, you can buy staples in 25-pound boxes. I found this price for 1.5 inch staples for $12 for a 5-pound box. Again, it depends on types of posts. You may not need very many staples, and then again, you might. So just check for how many posts you're putting in, and how much wires is going up, and how many staples that you want to put per post. Nails, you might need a few nails for your brace post, or for a gate or something, or if you decide that you're putting up boards in a place, you might need that. You're also going to need brace wire, which when you're putting in a brace or a pull station, you're going to need some wire. That's probably one of the least cost type things. I don't know how long that roll is, but typically a couple of rolls of brace wire gets you through a pretty large set of stretch of fence. In designing your fence, again, remember that the H-brace, that those are the foundation, and so you don't want to skimp on the post size when you're purchasing, because they can get a little expensive. Necessary equipment, you're going to need a wire fence stretcher. When you start to pull your wire after you've built your braces, when you start to pull a length, you're going to need that stretcher. I've used come along before with just barbed wire. We also have built our own, which is you take a couple of 2x4s, drill some holes through it, set it, place one 2x4 on the ground with the bolt sticking through it, lay the wire in between, and then put the other 2x4 over, sandwich it together, wrap the wire around so it can't pull through, and then tighten the nut down on top, sandwiching that wire in between those two 2x4s, and that makes yourself a nice puller, fence puller. And you'll need a chain to help you do that, pulling with either your truck or maybe a tractor. Equipment that you'll need to put a post in the ground: post hole diggers, a post pounder for T-posts, or an auger, either a self-propelled or a tractor. You're going to need some wire pliers. You're going to need a hammer, a tamping bar. You don't have to have a tamping bar, but typically a tamping bar is probably 25 or 30 pounds, and it makes a nice, it packs your post really good. If you don't pack your posts, you're going to wind up with posts that will lean. But you can use the end, the handle end of a shovel, or even your post hole diggers. It just makes it a little more difficult to do. A drill. You might need a chainsaw. You might need a hatchet. There's several other things, but you're definitely going to need a level when you're trying to put in your spreader post, because you don't want to see your spreader post, which is what goes between. It's the post that goes in between and makes the H for the brace. So here's a little bit of the equipment. If you can see my cursor, obviously a hatchet. I didn't even mention a tape measure. This is a set of wire pliers. This little gadget right there will save you a lot of time and energy. You can pull staples with it. You can stretch wire. You can do. It's pretty handy. It's very good. I like it better than this set of wire pliers, but this makes it pretty easy to cut wire as well. A hammer, and then a set of post hole diggers. This was something I wanted to show just for setting up, panels with boards. These posts were probably 5 to 6 inch posts, and then cattle panel set, and then boards. And this helps make a nice pin. I think that these cattle panels, though, that goats could probably get their horns through it. One thing about building a fence and necessary equipment that I would say is that you're going to also want a little bit of time and a great deal of patience. If you build your fence through the woods, be prepared for trees to go through it, or even if you're building it next to a tree, you could have limbs fall, and that can create a problem. So you want to check your perimeter of your fence. To show you just a couple of things, I wanted to show you that this is a single H. That is typically built within, once you can pull a 1/4 mile, and then you're going to need, another H brace. So this would be in the middle of the fence, basically. The double H over here is a corner. You can see and they set this through some trees that were here. If you're the landowner, you would definitely want to come in here, cut this tree out for sure, because all it's going to do is grow and probably unsettle the post there in the middle, and eventually cause you problems with the fence overall. And then the picture down at the bottom, the board fence, you can see that they really didn't they used a bigger post here, but there's no need for an H brace or anything with a board fence. So recapping things. Good fences make good neighbors. You want to think about your location, who's going to construct the fence, and make sure, I didn't mention this before, but make sure that your contractor is reputable. Check some references. Go check his fence out someplace. If they can't tell you where they built fence last, then maybe you don't need to hire them. Any needed building material, and then your necessary equipment. Make lists. Check them twice. And with that, I want to thank you. And do you have any questions?